County. But specifically for High Point, there's not been a study that focuses on the disparities here. And we who live in our community know that the difference within High Point is not one that we want to have, but we wanted to create a baseline because there is so much great work going on within our community. Whether that is great work with our around food insecurity with the Greater High Point Food Alliance, or High Point CAV, or the new gun violence initiative that's coming forward with Guilford County Health Department, whether it is the good work around the One High Point Commission and the NAACP bringing this forward and making the recommendation. It is important for us to collectively know what is that baseline for High Point, North Carolina, so that we can look at our initiatives and know across the county what is working and what we need to do. It's also important for us to break down those silos. It's important for us to come together collectively to continue to focus on the work being done within our community. This will provide us an opportunity to have funders within our community to actually look at how are we addressing as nonprofits the racial disparities and inequities. A few years ago, under Reverend Joe Blosser in High Point University, we created a DEI index through Community Builders. And with that, it really began to look for our nonprofits of how diverse are their boards reflecting our community. We have been able to see that funders like United Way and others have asked for that board makeup where they never had before. This is to have the opportunity for our community to have that baseline, and together, collectively, in community, we create what are those goals that we want to achieve. This scorecard additionally supports the recommendations that the One High Point Commission came forward with and actually reinforces the need and the vision that our City Council is going to move forward with. I want to thank again the NAACP for taking charge of the creation of that One High Point Commission and making that recommendation. With that, it is my pleasure to bring Dr. Stephen Seals forward. We are grateful again for his expertise and experience and taking this project on. Thank you.
Dr. Elma Harrison from the High Point NAACP. I could not be here with you in person this morning, but I wanted you to hear from the NAACP as it relates to the High Point Racial Equity Scorecard presentation for today. At the High Point NAACP, we are committed to the action and the advocacy that sustains the life of Black people, people of color, and all people of High Point. NAACP as a national organization is in the schoolhouse, the courthouse, the White House, advocating policy that is against race-based discrimination. This equity scorecard shows that discrimination exists in High Point, that disparity exists in High Point. We are on the cutting edge of an economic boom in High Point, and it is time for High Point to realize that everyone must participate. With the results of the One High Point Commission on Reparations, with the recommendations and the policies that have been proven and passed for this city, this data is proof positive that change needs to occur. And that change needs to be taken upon based on actions from individuals and education from the information that we have so that the Black citizens of High Point can have the equity that should have been afforded to them all along. African Americans are the only race that have to continually prove that we are citizens of this great country. We have the data. We have the people behind it. The charge is, let's get busy and do what we know that High Point needs to have done to bring equity in the much disparity that exists in this city. I thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to start off by talking a little bit about what a racial equity scorecard is and is not. I'll tell you a little bit about how we went about forming the task force and developing the indicators, looking at over 65 different indicators at the neighborhood level for High Point, specific to High Point. I'll highlight a few of the key indicators. You have the scorecard in front of you, so you can go into much more depth and detail in looking at those indicators for yourself. And then I'll tell you a little bit about some of the ways in which you can take this scorecard forward into an action plan and into change in the community, as Dr. Hairston had mentioned. So if you'll go to the next slide, please. And one more. Thank you. So as Heidi mentioned, the purpose of the Racial Equity Scorecard is to tell you what are the conditions today. What are the conditions in neighborhoods? What are the conditions around social determinants of health? What are the conditions in housing disparities, transportation opportunities, economic and educational opportunity in the community, and how does it play out on a racialized basis? Next card. I'm sorry. I'm just going to fill in a little bit more. There's a one right before this. So the Racial Equity Scorecard is a snapshot of indicators. It's a one-time view, and it's using whatever indicators we can find that are best to describe the conditions and disaggregated by race and ethnicity. This is not always possible. Many data points that are collected by the local or federal or state governments are not disaggregated by race. So we often have to look at what other opportunities for data sources do we have locally to be able to really hone in on racial disparities. So it's a snapshot of key indicators across these various sectors. It helps us better understand how racial disparities are impacting individuals and families in the community. And it's meant to give us a baseline now and a measure that can track progress. I'll give an example. The state is charged every 10 years with developing a health plan. The Healthy North Carolina 2030 plan is currently our plan. It has a 10-year goal to change these indicators with incremental one-year goals. So let's say we want to change housing disparities, home ownership by 10% in 10 years. That'll give us a number that we can work towards, and this scorecard, a measure to see if we're successful. Next slide, please. What the Racial Equity Scorecard does not do is give you the why. And so I really want you to take some time and read this Reparations and Reconciliation Commission report that was just released this fall. This is an important report because it sets the tone for the things that need to come after. It grounds in history of 200 years in this community specifically why we see racial disparities in these indicators. I'm a social scientist. I have to look at cause and effect. The reparations report gives you cause, and the Racial Equity Scorecard gives you the effect. So what was our approach? Next slide, thank you. First, this is a community-engaged project, so we needed to engage partners who represent different aspects of the community. We wanted this group to be diverse, both in experience and representation, ethnically, age, etc. The first step as a researcher is to look at what's been done before then. We performed a meta-analysis, looking across all of the indicator reports, all of the data that's been collected specifically for High Point and Guilford County over the years. And there were quite a few reports that have been done. This meta-analysis gives us grounding for understanding what are the important issues. We then began a process of identifying the indicators themselves, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. I then facilitated what we call a user design process or user design experience. iteratively going through each of the data points and showing we can present it this way in a bar graph, we can present it this way in a map, we can present it this way in another visualization. Which one works best for you and for this group? Which one communicates to the broadest audience in the clearest manner? And there were many iterations in this process. We changed the design multiple times until we got what we feel fits most of the people in the group. We then developed the public-facing scorecard, what you see printed out, what you see through the QR code online. This is meant to be disseminated broadly. Individuals, families, church groups, nonprofits, governmental groups, anyone in the community has access to the important data to steer their work. Now, the next step there in red is it has to be maintained and updated. Annually at best, every 5 years at worst, but you have to measure progress. You have to see, are we changing the needle on each of these issues? So the next slide gives you our committee members. You'll see that we had, as I mentioned, broad representation from many different sectors, nonprofit, governmental, business. We had racial diversity, we had age and gender diversity. We had a really good committee that was committed to this process, engaging monthly for multiple hours to do this work. Some of the things that we considered in the task force. First, our data interests. We all agreed that health indicators are an important measure. Health is the outcome of disparity. If you live in a community that doesn't have access to primary care, if you live in a community that doesn't have adequate fresh fruits and vegetables, then your health outcomes will show those disparities, and we can clearly see that by race and ethnicity. Housing considerations. The reparations report did a really good job at honing in on how we have segregated the community, devalued land values and home values in Black communities, turned them into rental neighborhoods and disinvested areas. And those housing disparities play out, again, in home ownership as well as health indicators themselves. We looked for specific data that reflected High Point. And this is more difficult than it sounds. Lots of data is collected by the US Census, by Department of Commerce, by Bureau of Labor, but that data is meant to be used at the aggregate of the whole country, or maybe a state or even a county level. Getting down to the neighborhood level is sometimes that needle in the haystack, looking for the measure that best represents across the community and can be consistently collected in future years. We also had an interest in this group in making sure that there were data points that talked about upward mobility and progress in accumulation of wealth intergenerationally. Housing was one of those, but also what are the entrepreneurial and business barriers that Black communities experience in having successful businesses, in getting access to capital, in being able to sell goods and services in a fair and equitable manner. Some of the racial equity issues that we focused on were safe, affordable housing and the neighborhood standards, food, transportation, quality childcare, educational access. We looked very carefully at birth-related indicators and chronic conditions as two areas in health concerns that have the greatest disparities. And finally, that economic development, addressing the wealth gap, employment rates, and opportunities across all races. We intentionally avoid lots of numbers. I'm, as I mentioned, a social statistician, a social scientist. I've taught research methods and stats classes, and I've watched eyes glaze and heads roll back and everybody fall asleep in a room. We want to communicate in a way that you can understand, anyone can understand, whether you're talking to a middle school or high school class, or you're talking to a group of senior citizens. So data visualization was very important. You'll see throughout this scorecard, there are many different ways to demonstrate the data, not just in numbers. So maps, bar graphs, charts, all tailored to represent this data that's collected for High Point specifically. Some of the additional considerations that the task force weighed were ensuring that the scorecard process was representative of the community and the organizations that it will serve. Too often we see people in the ivory tower of a university put some numbers together and tell the community this is what's what. This was assembled with and by this task force. So some of the specific tasks that the task force was engaged in: providing feedback on the indicators, feedback on the visual presentation, providing the recommendations for our next steps, reviewing the data sources and making sure that they agreed with these as good sources, and finally, providing feedback on how we'll disseminate the scorecard throughout the community. Next slide, please. Here are a few examples of past High Point projects. As I mentioned, our meta-analysis looked back across ways that we have already presented the information, as well as the dense reports that are behind some of these projections. We looked through them and said, what do we like about these? What do we want to keep? What do we not like? What doesn't communicate well? How can we borrow from some of these past projects and update them for this new scorecard? Next slide. So the data sources, many were national: the American Community Survey, the Bureau of Labor, Simmons Analytics. All of these are collected on a regular basis, and therefore we can say next year we'll have this data source. That's a very important thing when you're looking at creating a scorecard to measure the future. Can we get the same data in a timely manner each year after year? State data: North Carolina Department of Commerce, Employment Security Commission, Department of Education, all gave really good information on neighborhood level schools and their scores, disciplinary outcomes, business starts, and information like this. But we also delved into local data, municipal data from the police department, the school, the county, the Council of Governments with the PTRC, Piedmont Triad Regional Council. And then we also looked at what other primary studies had been done here locally and borrowed information from those studies as well. So information that's presented in the maps, information that's collected, is at the tract level, which is a little bit larger than a neighborhood, so that we could create good visualizations of the outcomes in the community. So in all, there were more than 65 indicators that were considered, and this, as I said, was a lengthy process. I assembled a long list of indicators for each of the domains, and we went through each, looking at whether it fit our criteria, whether it really represented the disparities in the communities that we wanted to hone in on, and that were things that we could rely on having data in the future. Median income, poverty rate, unemployment rate, home ownership rate were all considered in economics. Health indicators included life expectancy, that is the ultimate outcome of healthcare systems, infant mortality rates, the neonatal care, prevalence of chronic and health conditions by race. Educational indicators included high school graduation rates, college enrollment and completion rates, standardized test scores. Housing indicators looked at racial segregation indexes, percentage of substandard housing by race, median home values and cost burden status. Civic engagement looked at voter turnout, representation in local government, participation in civic organizations by race. And as I said in this next slide, it was a long process of considering each of the domains and all of the possible indicators that could look into that area. Some of the design considerations next. Some of the design considerations in laying out the scorecard were: is it clear? Does it get the point across? Is it simple enough that anyone can understand it? Does it overly complicate the presentation of information? How do we want it organized, thematically, chronologically? How do we want to assemble the information? Is the text balanced between the visualization and just enough text to explain, but not too much to turn someone off of reading the page? And finally, does it engage the audience that it's meant to engage? Some of our audience considerations, we really thought long: who's going to use this? We want this to be as widely used as possible, so we considered community groups, church groups, nonprofit agencies, social and civic participation organizations. How can we get this to the broadest audience possible? What's the demographic profile of that audience? Their age, their gender, their location. How knowledgeable are they about data and informatics? What are their interests in particular in changing racial disparities in the community? What's the level of literacy in both visual data literacy as well as reading literacy? What are the visual elements and styles that need to be considered? What knowledge and assumptions do we need to make about the audience, and how will this information be utilized by them? So the next one shows us some of the results. You have this in front of you. There's a lot of information on each of these pages. I'm going to hone in on just a few data points. First, economic disparities. Next slide, please. There we go. Just a few key data points, and I always start with this. I was a housing researcher for many years, and I see housing ownership as a key element of intergenerational poverty that we see in the community. If you go back to the 1870s, to the 1920s and 30s, you saw the black community owning homes, owning neighborhoods, owning businesses. Between the 1920s and present, we had racialized planning, we had redlining, we had urban renewal, and that stripped home ownership, and now 3 generations of wealth building has been lost. 37% of black households in High Point own their home versus 67% of white households. A 30 percentage point difference, almost twice as high. The rate is clear, and it's clearly associated to that history and legacy of racialized planning. I think it's a bedrock thing that we have to look at, and one of those key metrics that must be changed for there to be racial parity. 55% of black renter households are cost burdened. This means they're spending more than 30% of their income on housing and housing-related expenses. Renters are feeling the squeeze. If you've been squeezed out of the home ownership market and now you're in the housing market as a renter, you're at the mercy of whatever the landlord wants to charge for whatever condition property they're charging, and more than likely you will be spending between the rent itself, the utilities, and all other costs more than you should be, more than 30%, which is set by HUD. By comparison, 42% of white renter households in High Point are cost burdened. So we see a 13 percentage point difference between the two, almost a third more. 57% of black mortgage applicants were approved for their loans. Yay, great. But 67% of white applicants were approved. I've delved into disparities in the lending market using a data set called the Housing Mortgage Disclosure Act since, I think my first round with it was 2006. I've done it for this community ever since 2006, every year looking at those disparities. When we hold constant the price of the home, the income of the borrower, the neighborhood, all of the other variables, making them the same, and just looking at the difference by race, we see that a black male is almost 30% less likely to be able to get approved for a loan than a white male with all of the same characteristics, economic characteristics. This in what we call a colorblind system of lending. The poverty rate is a good indicator as well. We see that the poverty rate for black households is 24% versus 13% for white households. Again, almost double. Educational disparities are next. I'm honing in on just one of the educational attainment measures here, and we're looking at the differences between white and black populations in High Point as it relates to their highest degree achievement. We see that less than high school diploma, almost 20% of blacks in the community have less than a high school diploma. Now, part of this is a factor of aging population. We know that high school graduation rates are almost equal, about a 5% difference. So younger populations are closer in high school attainment than older populations. But the big differences there on the bachelor's degree are higher. We see that white residents in High Point are almost twice as likely to have a bachelor's degree or higher education than Black residents in High Point. And that is really key for lifetime income, for access to benefits such as health care and retirement accounts, being able to qualify for a bank loan for a mortgage. That difference in educational attainment really shows the economic impact of education long term. The next one we'll look at is public safety. Public safety is a difficult set of measures. It really highlights that there are disparities in outcomes with arrests and over-policing. It highlights the differences in who's being policed and who's doing the policing. But it also can be argued in many different ways, and it is. If you read newspaper reports on crime, some are that's a criminal neighborhood, and others are it's an over-policed neighborhood. So it's a delicate thing to talk about. 54% of arrests in High Point were for low-level nonviolent offenses. 55% of arrestees were Black versus 43% who were white. Remembering that 38% of the population is Black, so that's a disproportionate arrest rate. 45% of police use more force per arrest than 45% of departments across North Carolina. So we're in the halfway point almost with High Point compared to other police precincts in the state. An alarming figure though, 90% of High Point police officers are white. So that disparity alone may be a portion of over-policing and non-representation of the community being served. Next one, while 72% of residents in High Point worry about violent crime, we actually see that crime rates, both property crime in particular, are declining, and violent crime has just begun to decline again. It peaked a little bit in 2019. But if you look over the course of the past decade, it's fairly flat. This is important. Our popular media sometimes plays up the fact that there is violence that's impacting our community disproportionately to the data that is being reported. It's sensational. It is an issue, and I'm not saying that violence in our community is not. However, is it as big of an issue as we're making it to be, and how can we correct for that? The next one gives you a good map. We've colored this green and red so you can really see the difference. Think of the stoplight, green, yellow, red. 13.4 live birth, of 1,000 live births in the community, 13.4 women who are Black lose their child. So Black infant mortality, 13.4 deaths per 1,000 live births. By comparison, 4.5 deaths for white infant mortality for 1,000 live births. Okay, so that's 4 times as high. Infant mortality for the Black community is a serious concern. The map on the right gives you life expectancy, and we see that those dark green areas, you live up, on average 15 years longer than in the dark red areas in the community. Now, if you know the map of High Point, you know that that is a racialized map. That is an income map. That map doesn't just show the health outcomes, it is clearly correlated with the causes and disparities. The next one, civic engagement. I often use a survey tool that was based out of Detroit 20 years ago. It's been used all across the country, so it's a fairly reliable tool. And it looks at people's perception of discrimination. Have you been insulted this week, last month? Have you been called names? Have people acted as if they're afraid of you? Have they acted as if you're dishonest? It's a perceived discrimination scale. But what we see is Black residents in High Point perceive discrimination 10 times as often in the last week, or more often, than white respondents. The treated with less courtesy, acted as if better than you, people act as if you're not smart. Those are really high scores. 1 in 5 African Americans in High Point feel as if weekly they're being treated as if they're not as smart, not as good, or with less courtesy. I'm a white male. I walk into a restaurant, I sit down, I get bad service. That's a bad waiter. I'm going to give them 10%. You walk into a restaurant as a person of color, you sit down, they give you bad service. Is it because they're a bad waiter? Is it because I'm black? Is it because I'm a woman? Is it because I'm old? Is it because I'm young? Is it because of the way you have to go through these considerations. As a white male, I don't have to. I just think it's them, it's not me, right? Because that's what society teaches the majority population, the dominant population, the media population. These perceptions of discrimination are real in their outcomes, they're real in their impact, they're real in the way that we interact in business, in schools, in other places. We have to address that discriminatory behavior at its root. Next one, food access. 58%, more than half, almost 2/3 of census tracts in High Point are considered low income, low food access, what the USDA calls food deserts. Food deserts are extremely damaging to long-term health of the community. Diabetes, obesity, hypertension, heart disease, all related to how easily can you access affordable, healthy foods. Dollar General, Family Dollar, they are not grocery stores. 31% of black households versus 10% of white black households receive SNAP and EBT. Great programs, really were wonderful during the pandemic. Even more people are off of them now, and that is going to result in even further food insecurity. 6,800 residents in High Point report only having less than 1 serving of fruit or vegetables a day. Again, correlated back with that food desert information. The median household expenditure for food in High Point was $8,951 a year. That is 25% of the median income of a black household. Food expenses should be around 10 to 15% of a household's expenses. So we made a lot of recommendations, and I think we spent 2 sessions, maybe 3 sessions, going back over these recommendations and really thinking about what are the places that we must see change. We need to improve access to quality prenatal care. That infant mortality level is far too high. We must expand job opportunities and wage equity in those jobs. It's not just getting a job, it's getting a job that gets you over the benefits cliff. If you're making $15 an hour and you're going to a credentialing program that'll get you to $18 an hour, you're going to lose your benefits. It's not going to work. You got to get to that $25 an hour to then be able to survive. So job opportunities and wage equity paired. We have to think about systemic racism in schools. Very complicated topic. The ACLU's after Guilford County Schools for its disparities in treatment of children with suspensions and expulsions. It's a systemic issue, the way in which we over-police youth and then over-police adult communities. We have to improve public transportation. Every single study I've done in High Point, transportation. It is key. You can't get to the 3rd shift job, much less get home from the 2nd shift job. You can't get to the doctor and to childcare in a single day, so you've got now 2 days spent on that. You can't get to the grocery store and get home with all the groceries you need, so you have to go back 3 times during the week. We have to improve the access to public transportation throughout the community. We need to enhance voter registration efforts. I looked at voter registration data specifically. Everybody who's registered to vote, your information is public data. I looked at who voted by what party and by what race. We have to have a greater proportion of the black community voting each year. Crime prevention and community engagement have to go hand in hand. It's not forced top down, it's in partnership with community bottom up. We have to promote home ownership and fair lending. That means we need to pump more capital into Black communities, building better homes, repairing existing homes, doing infill development, not just of Section 8 voucher apartments, but of good quality homes that people can afford. And that goes hand in hand with that affordable housing initiative. We have to improve access to quality health care. This isn't just the free clinic. This is all of the preventive services before you have to go to the free clinic or to the emergency department. It's getting public health nurses, community health workers into neighborhoods to do some of that prevention work. And finally, promotion of digital inclusion. If kids can't get access to the internet, if you don't have access to a computer, you can't get those jobs. You can't learn those things on Khan Academy or other platforms. Digital divide is a huge issue, and we're getting ready to see a lot of capital flowing through from the state. There's an RFP right now, millions of dollars to address digital divide in our communities. I give the data sources there, and I charge you with thinking, what are those metrics you want to see? What do you want to see changed in 10 years? Do you want to see that housing home ownership rate go up by 10%? How do we invest then in that? Do you want to see that infant mortality come down by 3 or 4 points? How do we achieve that? What neonatal programs are we going to get out there? What mom's health programs are we going to get out there? You have to think about each of these metrics in terms of what do we want in the future now, and how are we going to measure our progress in getting there? Do I have time for questions? Bernita. I can give her mine. Okay. I'm breaking the rules.
First of all, it's excellent information and excellent report. And I think that we know over the last 10, 15, 20 years, we continue to get this same type of information, but we don't see the change. And so we also know that what we are experiencing is systemic. It's not things, it's built into the fabric of who and what we do and how we do it. And so as we look at this, sometimes you think we do these reports, they stay on the shelf, and nothing happens. So, you know, I get the recommendations that we have to say, how do we fix this? How do we change it? But I also believe that at the end of all this, we need to be talking about those nonprofits that are out there doing this work. There's some nonprofits that get started just because they woke up in the morning and felt like this is something they needed to do. But we need to be very directed and targeted about how we move forward in this space. Because otherwise, 5 years from now, 3 years, whatever that time period is, we'll be hearing this same information again. And so I challenge everybody in this room that touches these spaces and these places to really look at your work plan within your organizations, the city as well, to say, how do we move forward to change this narrative in our community? And know that although we're talking about High Point, it's across the county. It's not just our community. And so there's spillover and bleed over and everything else regarding this information. So my question to you is, I get the recommendations. As a community, how do we move forward to make sure that 3 years from now, 5 years from now, you're not telling us the same stuff? Because when we did this same study with High Point Resilience, I would love to see from the time we did that information to the day, has anything changed? Did we move forward? Did we go backwards? Where are we in this space?
Yeah. So first, I think we're at an inflection point right now. We have a really great opportunity. Across the country, there have been many attempts to do reparations. High Point has a plan. High Point's now taking that reparations report and recommendations and turning it into community action planning. I think the YWCA, I think Foundation for Healthy High Point and Welfare Reform Liaison Project and other nonprofit partners already on board need to work in that community action plan on specific metrics. I'll use the Healthy North Carolina as an example. They convene annually community working groups. It's part of the state health improvement plan that's updated annually. Those working groups meet regularly, like monthly, every other month, to delve into the data, to delve into the policies that are driving the data, and then make recommendations around changes to those policies so that we can see the incremental increases. And they're small. You know, we're asking for a 3% change in third grade reading scores by race by 2030, 3%. But we know that that's because it takes so long to invest in kindergartners to third graders to get through 3%. So each year we're looking at, are we making that incremental gain? Why not? Let's change this policy. Let's push this advocacy. I think that this report gives you the domains, and now we need work groups in each of those domains. The work group must have government and political will, and so that's both the electeds and the folks running departments in local government. The capital, so working with the county and others who have capital, the foundations. It has to have representation from affected community members, lived experience. It has to have people within the business sector who are buying into the process. And then it also has to have, there's nonprofits that are at the table for every single one of these events. We need all of those domains together, capitalized and empowered to then be able to implement the action plans that come out. One group can't tackle all of them. It needs to be segmented into smaller groups. One group focusing on housing, one group focusing on health, and even maybe more micro than that, one group focusing on maternal health, and another group focusing on rental rights. You know, very, very focused community action planning and groups. And then you have the measures each year, each few years, to say, are we actually moving the needle? Are we evaluating our outcomes? And it's an iterative process. If we're not, why not? What are the intervening causes for us not to achieve what we need to? Great question, Bernina. Thank you. Yes, ma'am.
Hello, my name is Kristen Brooks, and so I wanted to simply address the infant mortality rate and that particular portion. I myself am attempting and trying to become a doula because I want to be able to be there for those women like myself or my sister things who don't have someone beside them and they need that education and support. The YWCA just a few years ago used to have a free doula certification program that they no longer have, and now they just refer you to this donor program, which runs about $600 to $1,100, and something that I know I personally can't afford. And so if we're trying to decrease the infant mortality rate, that program, I wanted to just stand up and say, bring that program back. That would be amazing because someone like me and I'm sure there are plenty of other women who would love to be able to get that type of certification, but we don't have $1,100 to drop on a certification course. I got the time, I just don't have the money. So I just simply wanted to just throw that out there and say, please bring that program back because I know plenty of women who would love to do so. And if not, how can we create another free certification program that certifies women in this community and other communities like it to become doulas and things like that when you can't afford to pay for it?
Stephen,
Yeah.
so the program that you're mentioning is the YWCA of Greensboro's program, and sadly that is no longer a program. However, there is a lot of great work going on within Guilford County around doulas. With Every Baby Guilford, YWCA actually received a grant 2 years ago for a pilot program where we have 2 doulas that do 4 births a year. And then Every Baby Guilford just got a grant that started this summer. They now have a doula coordinator, and they are hiring some new doulas. So I'll connect you.
I think that community health worker model in particular, whether it's doulas or public health nurses or other programs, really getting health care out into the community at the street level, at apartments, in micro clinics, at pop-ups, getting health messaging out is so important as prevention. Yes, ma'am.
Good morning. Thank you, Heidi. I was going to address that to you. Every Baby Guilford, that is funded, the Guilford County Health Department does have a program. So if you could get in touch with them, they could very well help you, because they are doing great work that has been recognized across the state and across the nation for the work that they're doing to reduce infant mortality. And the Guilford County Commissioners are committed to that, and we have given them a goal to reduce infant mortality in Guilford County by 2025 by 95%. So we are heavily involved in that, but they do have a program that could assist you. But I also want to echo some of the comments that were made by Ms. Sims to say, thank you for this report. It is absolutely excellent, because number one, you have to acknowledge that there is racism and discrimination before you can do anything about it. So when you see these kinds of numbers that are impacting Black people in High Point, we know that something has to be done about it. I think that we create programs, and programs are good. You know, I work in a nonprofit, so we all have programs, but programs don't always fix the problems. Mm-hmm. We have to look at creating access and opportunity for people to be successful. We have to look at the power structure. Who's at the top and who's at the bottom? Who's at the table? Because when we create programs, what are we looking at? We're looking at statistics that have been created by other people. And with nonprofits, we count the number of people that we serve. And that's how we get our funding. But are we really making a difference? How do we measure the difference and how the differences are being made in High Point? I think that we have to look at things a little bit differently. We receive this information, just as Bernita said, but we're going to have to look at our structures across our city, across our county. Who's in charge? Who's making the decisions? How are the people, everything in here references Black people, Black residents, and we're at the bottom. Who's making these decisions, and what is the impact? Are we really creating, are we trying to create access and opportunity, or are we just looking at these numbers?
I think you've pointed out that programs are Band-Aids. Programs treat immediate crises and issues, but they don't fix the systemic causes. And so, as you're saying, we need to get to looking at systems-level solutions and changing power structures that reward by race one group over another. In Forsyth County, I've just recently started as Chief Impact Officer of the United Way there. I'm changing our giving model so that we are rewarding agencies that are working at systems levels with higher dollar amounts than those that are just doing the crisis work. And it's not saying we don't need that crisis work. We need emergency care for people. But we also need to change the systems that are causing those crises. And if we don't move upstream, then we will have major issues. I know Foundation for Healthy High Point just went through this process at looking how can we move upstream to the solutions rather than just the outcomes. Yes, sir.
It's already been said. This report, those of us who are here, he's preaching to the choir. Black people know we're on the bottom of the totem pole. We don't know the exact numbers, but we know we're worse off. So we don't necessarily need this report to know that we have issues. But one thing I wanted to share to my Anglo brothers and sisters who are here. Oppression of any type will never cease as long as the oppressed are the only ones talking about it. Mm-hmm. It's going to take more people in positions of impact and power to say, at least say, not on my watch. At least say, if you're in a position of influence, if you're in a position of power, to say, what am I going to do to make the difference, to make the change, to make things better for everybody? And then we just on Monday, We celebrated a new council who is now, we have the right people, I believe, in the right positions to affect change, to take the disparities report, to start a disparity study and the report and the One High Point Commission. I think it's been said, we've studied long enough. I think it's time now to put our money where our mouth is and make some policy changes, because that's where the rubber meets the road, and that's where the effective change really takes place, with policy change. Now, with policy change, please understand that policy change affects slow movement sometimes. We see this report and we want the new year to be the new year. It's going to take longer than that. So I also caution us and be prayerfully patient in understanding that the policy changes that take place are going to be important. And I would just encourage those of you who are in the position of power and in the position of influence to at least raise your hand and say, not on my watch.
Thank you.
We have a question back here.
My foci is health and nutrition. So all of the things in the report are social determinants of health. How big a portion of the action plan and things that you're suggesting are educational? If you've never known anything but processed food, it doesn't matter that there's not a Harris Teeter in your grocery in your neighborhood. So helping to correlate health with your nutrition and chronic illness with your intake is just not something that people know, or not know in a big enough way to impact health outcomes. So how much of what is planned for this community is education about that?
So just to preface my reply, that's the next step, the community action plan, the engaging community members in taking it forward. My recommendation, education is core. I was part of a lifestyle intervention program around diabetes. It takes 20 years to change somebody's community level diabetes outcomes. It takes maybe 5 years or so per individual. But when you're changing the lifestyle of a community, you have to think in culturally appropriate manners. You can't just come in with a Whole Foods and say, well, eat a kale salad. You got to say, oh, let's substitute, I'm from the South, let's substitute the pork back in the collards for some olive oil, incrementally. Thinking about the ways in which you can do culturally appropriate education. We can still have it at New Year's, we can still have it at special occasions. Was that smoked turkey? Yeah, there you go, okay, yeah. But thinking about education is, there's not just one education. We have to think in terms of, are we changing cultural health practices? What are educationally appropriate manners to do so? We used walking groups, this was outside Detroit. Everybody walks. Everybody can walk. We did a challenge where we got families with pedometers on to walk against other families in their neighborhood, and who could accumulate the most steps, and then they'd get a gift card. It was great. People loved it. And your team could be grandma and grandkids and aunts and uncles. Everybody in the family could get together and create a team. There's so many creative ways in which to do that education towards better health care, towards better health outcomes. Yes, I see several hands now.
Good morning, Stephen. Good morning.
Hey, how are you doing today?
I have a commentary, but I'll only ask my 2 questions, all right? First, regarding your scorecard, what time frame was studied?
Yep.
And then secondly, how do you account in this scorecard for the history of underreporting and not reporting at all in this place called High Point?
Yeah. Both are problems. First, ACS data is 5-year trend data, so it's 2021 and before. The nice thing about 5-year trend data is that it's a good regular measure. Each year, the American Community Survey is done again and again. But you're right in that it's under-reporting because it's a telephone survey that hits a couple of households per neighborhood, and those households then are somehow projected mathematically to be representative of the greater community. So there are acknowledgments in the data sources to its under or over-representation. Some of the other data sources, like the police department data, is close to the ground as we could get. We used the local reports. We used the FBI UCR reports that they make to the FBI. But under-reporting of property crime, under-reporting of other criminal issues, it is an issue as well there. What we did, though, was we said we have to use the best available that's regularly available and is acknowledged as the gold standard of usage when comparing across with other cities or within the city from year to year. No data source is perfect. There's loss in all data. Good question, though, Tony. Thanks.
God bless you all, and thank you. Is it working? Amen. Thank you. Your report was excellent, and I was so blessed by it. And I want to thank everyone that had a part in putting this together, because this is so very important. What we are watching is while we are celebrating the growth and we're celebrating the great and wonderful things that are coming to High Point, we are also beginning to not envision, but to High Point is dying on a lot of levels, because the things that you love so much about it, the things that you prize so much about High Point are going out the window. I've been here for, it'll be 7 years in August. 7 is biblically the number of completion. In the time that I've been here, I've seen more supermarkets close. I've seen so much disparity in living conditions. Father, have mercy. I am from New York, amen, and from Brooklyn, New York, from downtown Brooklyn, New York, which has become the new Wall Street of New York, okay? And I have watched what has been done. We no longer in America have a middle class. Say what you want. I don't care what your salary is. You can have somebody making $250,000 a year, and if it's not together, they are poor. And so we're seeing these things happen, and we're watching as we're looking at the disparities increasing. We're looking at the increases in other areas, without naming names and getting myself into trouble, where they are beginning to just burgeon and just doing so well, but it has nothing to do with the community or the people that live here. So I thank you for this. The gentleman that said about all the statistics and all that, it is so true, and we get so sick of it. But at this time, it's something that that's all we have. What I'm hoping for is that within the next 2 years, a year from now, 2 years from now, we come back to look at, to see what's been done since today. Not wait for the next report to come out to tell us what we already knew. Reminds me of The Wiz, and all I can hear is the woman singing, "Don't nobody bring me no bad news," because that's all we seem to get. But we need to, and we know the bad news. We know what's wrong. When you look at the talk of the police department, and I am retired law enforcement, don't get me started. So when you look at these things that are going on, we have to be more realistic about what we're facing. And the point that was made by this gentleman was very right. It takes all of us. Black, white, purple, or blue, green. It doesn't matter, because what affects you is going to affect me. And certainly what affects me is going to affect everyone in this room. So it's for all of us to get together. So I'm so very blessed by this. This is a great beginning. And kudos to the YWCA for what they're doing, as well as everybody else here. And I'm excited to see, what will happen. But we can't wait for the next report to come out 5, 10 years from now. We need to come back and check to see what we've done from today until next year or the year from then to then rethink and redo or look at what we need to do next. Because this is a constant battle, but it's something that can be uphill. And no, High Point is not a case in itself. This is something that's going on nationwide. Amen. God bless y'all. Thank you.
There was one point that you made that I really want to lift up, and that is that we need to do redevelopment without gentrification. You can't end up with a Brooklyn turning into a Wall Street here in High Point. You need to preserve community heritage and history while lifting up the standards and amenities in a community. And that's a difficult balance. The investment of capital from the business community and the government has to pay off in some way, but too often it's to pay off by creating a leaf blower effect and pushing people out of the neighborhoods that they've always lived in. So you have to it's a delicate balance. Are we good on time there? Okay.
Great, good morning. My question is really surrounding the education piece, and we talk about the leaders that are at the top. A lot of times, there is no, you made a great point in referencing, I'm a white male, I go to the restaurant, it's not an issue for me. How are we focusing on also making sure that the leaders, the people who are making the decisions currently, have the education, have the training, DEI, conflict resolution, because of course, obviously, tension comes along when we talk about race disparities and inequities. So I'm just trying to, see exactly, have we put any thought into, having training available for those that are at the top who may not necessarily see that there is an issue or are able to look at it from a different lens. So that's just really my question.
Yeah, so our school board, I think, if you followed the news with the division in the school board, it's a very tenuous situation. I will give Dina Hayes lots of credit. She runs Racial Equity Institute. She is the person to go to get DEI training, and she's made sure that that is throughout the school district. The choices of superintendents these last 2 rounds have been very powerful around DEI. But as a person who studies Guilford County deeply, I think sometimes High Point gets left out in that voice in Guilford County schools. I know that the commission, the Guilford County commissioners, are looking to High Point and Greensboro to put some money in the pot there. I'm not sure if that's the solution, but it's definitely getting more voice for High Point and the balance of the county into the mix. Yes, DEI at the top is important.
And also, we will be hosting a REI Phase 1 in January. That is the 2-day training, and we have been very strategic to have community leaders be a part of that. And then we'll be offering the groundwater in March. These are both 2 trainings through Racial Equity Institute with Dina Hayes and Monica Walker.
Thank you.
My name is Winnie Merritt. I'm a member of the Baha'i Faith community, a small community, but very diverse religious affiliation. And you mentioned systems. I'm all through this place right now, there are people of faith who are here because they believe that we have a creator who cares about his humanity, and we want to do something about it. And some years ago, we had a workshop in our small community on reading our reality. But I want to thank you that now we have a document that we can take to the community. So I didn't hear you say in the partnerships, are faith communities as such part of this, not just individuals, because we know our faith communities are where this word could get out. So I just wanted to, I'm very nervous because you all know a lot more than I do, but thank you.
Definitely, you're right. Faith communities play a backbone support. They are anchor partners at the neighborhood level. We think of anchor partners as the school district or the hospital. No, faith community is the anchor partner in each neighborhood, and probably the most responsive of the system. Is there food security in your neighborhood? Your church is going to be doing the turkey drive for Thanksgiving. It's going to be doing the food boxes on the weekends. It's the responsive mechanism. Many organizations have begun to really double down on that. The hospital system, through the Congregational Nurses Program, has placed healthcare front lines in churches. The United Way in Winston-Salem, where I'm at, has 27 churches that we're working with as sponsored partners for after-school programming, for health programs and community health workers. It's through those churches that we make the most impact in the community, I believe, yes. Well, thank you so much. I'll pass this back to Heidi.
Thank you, Dr. Stills. And, you know, there's a lot of discussion about community, about not having this be just another report that sits on a shelf. It is as Frank said, it is a call to everyone within our community, especially individuals who are white like myself, that we step forward, and this is not okay. It's not okay on our watch. We must take change. We must empower our new city council and really lift them. We charge you all with taking this change. One thing I'd like to share for our many nonprofits in this community that are in this room is on our website, there is it's in partnership with Change Often and Community Builders, the organizational anti-racism rubric. This is a rubric that all of our nonprofits can take to address and see where they are. It's confidential within that, and then if they want further support, they can reach out to the Guilford Nonprofit Consortium, YWCA, and other partners in the community. At this point in time within our program, I want to again thank Pastor Lavelle McMichael and Greater New Hope for opening the doors here. And I'm going to turn this over to Councilman Holmes. Oh, sorry. I got to get my Mayor Pro Tem. Thank you. Holmes, Mayor Pro Tem. Here you go.
Thank you. I won't walk up there to the pulpit. I'll stay here. First of all, I want to say thank you to the YWCA. I want to say thank you to Greater New Hope, Dr. Seals, for an incredible illuminating report that we have heard this morning. Unfortunately, for a lot of us, this is not new. Immediately upon arriving this morning, I had a conversation with a gentleman who says, this is the same neighborhood that I grew up in. This is the same neighborhood that I grew up in. Amen? It has not changed. It has not progressed. And that is the essence of what we face here. And so as we talk about all the statistics that were highlighted in the report, we have to recognize the gravity that we face. That these are not just numbers on a page, these are people's lives. We account these in the lives of people who live, die, progress, of children who every day go to school to learn and attain less than other demographics. We account for these in the numbers of sicknesses and lacks and deaths of our generations to come. We account for these numbers in the lives of people, so we must keep that in the forefront of our mind, that these are just not numbers on a page. We know that going forward, we can't do this in silos. We cannot continue to play hero ball, one-on-one against the world. We cannot do that. We know that there are a lot of great organizations out here who are doing fantastic work, but none of us are as strong as all of us. So as we go forward, we have to have an accounting of who is doing the work. In order for us to put together a strategic plan that's going to be effective, we have to know who's at the table. And we have to cultivate opportunities for those who are at the table. We know that those who are the most effective understand the problem the deepest. So if we're going to craft solutions the people who are end users or are most affected have to be part of that solution, and they have to set the expectation. Because success or failure is always perception, isn't it? How fast, how far we progress is perceived differently by different people. So in order for us to have a viable metric of success, those who are most effective have to be there to set that. And we have to have transparency, folks. We have to know, the left hand has to know at this point what the right hand is doing. Because if not, then we'll duplicate work. We'll do things over. We'll waste time and resources that we don't have simply because we lack knowledge. And so we have to have that transparency. And we also have to recognize that we are at a convergence of a historic opportunity. Look all around you, all in this region. There's opportunity for folks that we've never seen before. Billions and billions of dollars of capital being poured into this region. Now, it took me 15 minutes to drive here from North High Point. Imagine losing out on a life-changing or a personal economy-changing job because you can't get somewhere 15 minutes away. Imagine that. Imagine your quality of life being limited by a 15-minute drive. It's unconscionable and it's unimaginable. We have the ability to be able to solve these problems. The question is, do we have the will? And that's going to take some very crucial conversations with some communities that probably are unaware of what is going on. The bane of my existence up in North High Point is, how do I bring those folks who live in Northborough, or Greenpoint, as we are so affectionately called, into the reality that they have to be part of the solution. And that is our charge. So to that end, as we talk about a plan, as we go forward in the new term, thank you all for participating in the election, we will be launching what is called our TECH committee, transparency, engagement, communication. Never before has it been done. We're on a consistent basis. We engage communities, nonprofits, churches, amen, because we know the hub of information, the network of information travels through houses of faith. So we want to make sure that you are in the know as soon as we know. So that way our community understands what is happening in our government, what opportunities lie before them, and how they can access those opportunities. Because we talk about home ownership. We have programs right now that exist in our government that a lot of people are unaware of. Down payment assistance. We have programs like Operation Inasmuch that are repairing houses. How do we get access to those? How do folks know? And so we have to have levels of engagement and communication and transparency in order for folks to be able to understand what is and what needs to be. And that transparency and that communication has to come back to us, because we're only human. We can only know as much as we know. But if you are giving us the feedback, letting us know what is necessary, what you need, we can then craft those solutions around the needs of our community. And this is a call to action, folks. First, you have to acknowledge, I was so glad that Commissioner Foster said that. We have to acknowledge the challenge that we face. We have to acknowledge the reality of the systems that have been burdening black communities down for centuries. But we also have to accept the responsibility of change. We have to accept the responsibility, and we have to take action, because we cannot be afraid to challenge these systems. You know, I always say that a system is like a car. It'll go wherever you want it. It'll take you wherever you want to if you have the keys. So whoever's at the steering wheel and they have the keys, they can drive that system wherever they want to go. So that means that we have to cultivate opportunities for the folks who look like who are the people that we are trying to affect change in those communities. They have to be at the table. So it is a call to action to business communities, to nonprofits, to boards and commissions within our government. We have to diversify what these tables look like. We have to bring the people who are going to make these decisions from within the community to be able to make effective, lasting, positive change. And so as we move forward with the One High Point recommendations, our city staff right now is working so hard to come up with an implementation plan. So what does that look like? First, we have to have an accounting of all of the people who are going to be part of the work. What are you doing? What is your organization? What do you specialize in? How many organizations are doing this same work? How can we create a coalition for specific actions around education, housing? We shouldn't have 15 organizations operating in silos doing the same work. You should all be at the table forming a powerful, unified coalition to address these issues. So what we're going to do going forward is we're going to have an accounting of all of the folks who are doing the work. And then as we move forward, our steering committee, very much like we have a 2045 steering committee, we're going to have a steering committee that looks forward of how do we implement these recommendations into our community. And it will be made up of folks from these different groups who have the expertise, the connections, and also the opportunity to be able to bring in the things that we need to make these effective. And so as we continue to move forward, we're going to need a high level of engagement so that this doesn't fall off the radar. This will be part of our monthly report out from council. Just like we report on marketing and branding, just like we report on community development. The One High Point Commission actions will be reported out on a monthly basis. So that gives you a chance to hold us accountable for not letting this report sit on the shelf and gather dust. Because if we don't have anything to report month after month, then that's a shame on us, right? And so for us, we're going to need engagement from the community at a level that we've never had to be able to do something that has never been done. You know, I've been very fortunate to travel to the League of Cities, and when we make the announcement to what Dr. Seal said, that we have passed a municipal reparations package, the room falls silent. Because so many folks have talked about it. So many folks have strategized on how it will get done. High Point, we have actually done it. There's Boston, Anaheim, so many municipalities have reached out and said, can you please show us what you did to get to this point? I've sent them the One High Point report. I've sent them, and they've all sent back and said this is amazing work. So we have to realize that we stand here as leaders in racial reconciliation and the destabilization of racially concentrated poverty. We have a plan, but the question is, do we have the will? And if we're going to have the will, it's going to take every one of you in this room to be part of our long-term solution. So please stand up, be accounted, allow us to go forward in partnership, in collaborative partnership to do this amazing work. Because just like I said earlier, none of us are as strong as all of us. So thank you. We appreciate all that you have done from a community partnership standpoint, and I look forward to the great, great work ahead. Thank you.
So we're going to call Carvina up in just a second. Can you put there you go. If you have not registered for this event, one of the things that you can do in taking action is scan that QR code and fill out that form completely so that we know who's in the room. The only way we can get information to you, how many of you will be honest and say, I did not register for this event? Oh yeah, I know y'all ain't telling the truth. And come on, y'all in the church now. Come on. I see phones going up. So if you would just get the QR code, and the RSVP QR code is the one that you want. That will take you directly to GivePulse. GivePulse is our volunteer platform that we use at High Point University to track all of our volunteer and community impact. And we will be able to not only notify you of upcoming events, but you will be able to look on our GivePulse page and see all of the service opportunities that are located within the community by zip code. So if you are a nonprofit that are here today, we want you to sign up for GivePulse so that you can put those volunteer opportunities on that platform as well, so that we can connect all of these organizations together so that as we help the community, we can keep track of the collective work that we're doing so that we don't duplicate efforts. So at this time,
I just wanted to stand and make one correction to something that Dr. Seals said, and he knows that I'm saying this. He said that Dina Hayes Green, who does own Racial Equity Institute, make sure that equity and inclusion and diversity training takes place across the district. I'm going to correct that. She does not. She owns Racial Equity Institute. It's a conflict of interest. Racial Equity Institute does not do any work with Guilford County Schools. She is the chair of the school board. That's how easy it is to stand up when you see something that's not right and correct it then and there.
Should I drop the mic? No, I'm just playing. All right, another way you can help with this is this has been live broadcasted on YouTube and Facebook via the Greater New Hope page, and it has been shared on the YWCA page. So to get this information out to as many community members as possible. One of the things we also want to do is make sure that the African American leadership of High Point that are working today and that are not able to come during the day to get this kind of information, get this information. It's time for us, not only as a community, but as people who understand the importance of valuing those who are the least of these, that we come together so that we can hold the city accountable and all of the dollars that are being distributed, making sure that they're going to the right places and not just the who's who of High Point. So the only way we can do that is make sure that we come together and have things in order so that as programming is developed, as systems are being shifted and changed, that we're at the cutting edge of what's happening. So I'm really grateful for the YWCA having this here at a local church that impacts the community. 90% of our church actually live in High Point, so we're excited about that, and we want to make an impact in this Burns Hill neighborhood. Many of you know the Burns Hill Food Pantry has been closed for several months now because the volunteer that was running that food pantry has not been able to do that, and so we really need the community to step up, and those who know these integral parts of the community that are lacking to be able to really make those changes so that we can continue to move forward even when others are not able to. So thank you so much for being here. There is some food in the back. Well, I won't say food because it is not Greater New Hope's Culinary Ministry breakfast. It is YWCA. And refresh. There is some water, some bottles of water, and some fruit and stuff like that. I'm just joking. Heidi knows I love her. So we're gonna now unto him that is able to keep us from falling and to present us faultless before. All right. So thank you so much for coming out, and you can put up the scorecard, and we're gonna dismiss it this time. Thank you all. Please, when you're leaving the parking lots and all of that, be careful. If you want to contribute to our new parking lot that's being, so just be careful. All right.